Have you ever felt like a fraud? Has your mind ever been paralyzed by doubt just when you were about to shine? The truth is, insecurity doesn't start in your head, but rather in your body. If I tell you that in 2 minutes in the bathroom, can you alter your brain chemistry and reprogram your mind for self-confidence? Harvard psychologist Amy Cuddy proved you don't need to feel confident to act like one. You need to act as such for to become confident. In this video, you will learn how to use the power of your posture, not only for opinion powerful, but for reduce the stress hormone cortisol by 25% and turn on the switch of your assertiveness. Get ready to replace fake it till you make it with a much deeper method, the fake it till you make it. If you're tired of being your own worst critic and want to eliminate the voice of doubt once and for all, this is the ultimate guide. We'll detail the 10 strategies of presence. Stop just watching. Click the button now. Sign up and turn on notifications. I guarantee this will be the video that changes the way you enter any room. Let's begin the reprogramming. The power of body posture. The concept of the power of body posture, or power posing posture theory, developed and popularized by social psychologist Amy Cuddy, rests on the revolutionary premise that how we physically position ourselves is not only a reflection of our internal mental state, but also a powerful indicator of it. Causal agent capable of altering this mental and physiological state, this idea subverts the traditional understanding that the mind commands the body. Instead, it proposes a two-way feedback loop where the body can be the gateway to psychological change. The research that underpins this topic delves into the interaction between body language and human neuroendocrine systems, focusing primarily on two key hormones that regulate our behavior in challenging and evaluative social situations: testosterone and the cortisol. Testosterone is the hormone typically associated with dominance, self-assertion, and risk tolerance. In social and power contexts, individuals who occupy high-status positions, both in human societies and in primate hierarchies, tend to exhibit consistently higher levels of testosterone. This hormone facilitates the so-called approach system, which drives the individual to act, seek rewards, and face challenges, rather than withdraw. Cortisol, on the other hand, is the primary stress hormone. Elevated cortisol levels are a physiological response to threats, insecurity, and anxiety, and are strongly linked to feelings of self-doubt, inhibition, and the urge to flee or avoid. In social hierarchies, individuals with lower status or who feel less powerful generally exhibit chronically higher cortisol levels. The great discovery of research on body posture lies in its ability to modulate the balance between these two hormones in a short space of time, typically just 2 minutes, without the need for pharmacological intervention or prolonged therapy. The original experimental study distinguished between two types of postures: high-power poses and low-power postures. High-power poses are those that involve openness and expansion. They utilize as much space as possible, with limbs stretched out from the body, head held high, and arms open. Examples include placing arms behind the head while reclining, the Paktan boss and pose, or the classic Wonder Woman and pose, with hands on hips, legs apart, and chest open. These poses are universally recognized as indicative of power, victory, and dominance in various cultures and species. In contrast, low-power postures are postures of closure and contraction. The individual becomes small, hunched over, hugging themselves, crossing their arms and legs, and avoiding occupying space. These postures signal submission, defensiveness, and vulnerability. The rigorous study protocol involved participants adopting one of these postures, high power or low power, for only 120 seconds. After this brief period, saliva samples were collected to measure testosterone and cortisol levels, and participants underwent behavioral tests that measured risk tolerance, like a betting game. The results were statistically striking. Individuals who adopted the high-power poses demonstrated a significant increase of approximately 20% in their levels of testosterone and a notable decrease of approximately 25% in the levels of cortisol. In other words, in just 2 minutes, they became physiologically more dominant and less stressed. Behaviorally, they also proved to be much more prone to taking risks compared to the low-power group. Participants who adopted the low-power pose experienced the opposite effect. They experienced a reduction in testosterone, and in some cases, an increase in cortisol. Being small for 2 minutes made them physiologically less assertive and more anxious. The most profound implication of this research for the topic of combating doubt is the concept of fake it till you become it, fake it till you make it, a variation of the famous fake it till you make it. Cuddy argues that by adopting a powerful stance, before During a moment of high pressure, such as a job interview, a presentation, or a negotiation, the individual induces a neuroendocrine change that puts them in a mental state of presence. Being in a state of presence means that a person is able to access their truest thoughts, feelings, values, and potential, without being derailed by debilitating anxiety. Reduced cortisol calms the fear system, while increased testosterone provides the necessary boldness to act and speak with conviction. The power of body posture, therefore, is not about forcing false confidence, but rather about using a simple self-induction technique to align with the power that already exists internally, but which is often stifled by doubt and stress. It's a biological hack that allows the body to communicate to the brain, "You are in control," transforming the vicious cycle of doubt into a virtuous cycle of self-confidence and assertiveness. By silently changing posture, you change the chemistry, and by changing the chemistry, you change the mind and, consequently, the behavioral results. Fake it till you become it. The principle of fake it till you make it, fake it till you become it, is a crucial conceptual reformulation of the popular expression, fake it till you make it, fake it till you make it, and represents the core of Amy Cuddy's proposal on the internalization of self-confidence. The fundamental difference lies not in the initial act of unpretending, but rather in the ultimate goal and no psychological mechanism through which change is achieved. It is not about reaching an external goal or deceiving the public indefinitely, but rather about fundamentally transforming the inner state and identity of the individual. The history and details of this concept delve into neuroplasticity and the theory of self-perception of attitudes. Traditionally, it was believed that internal attitudes and beliefs, such as confidence, preceded and dictated external behavior, such as a powerful posture. Cuddy's work, however, reverses the arrow of causality, suggesting that behavior can be used as a primary tool to reshape attitude and, ultimately, identity itself. When an individual adopts a high-power stance, as discussed earlier, or engages in assertive behavior, even while feeling internally insecure, they are effectively providing behavioral data to their own cognitive system. According to self-perception theory, people infer their attitudes and beliefs from observing their own behavior. If an individual repeatedly sees themselves acting in a way that is socially associated with confidence and power, that is, taking up space, speaking clearly, taking calculated risks, the brain begins to generate internal assignment corresponding. The mind argues, if I am behaving this way, it is because I must be confident. This process is reinforced by the hormonal feedback loop. By adopting a high-power posture, the individual is not merely acting. They are inducing a real biochemical change, increased testosterone, decreased cortisol, that confers a genuine feeling of greater control and mastery. This real physiological sensation provides a somatic basis for the new belief. The body is sending power signals to the brain. The key to fake it till you make it is consistency and the context. The application of this principle is not a one-time event, but a repeated practice that, over time, solidifies the new attitude. Each time a person uses a power pose in a stressful moment, such as an interview or a meeting, and realizes they survived the situation, or even came out well, their internal belief system is subtly altered. The repetition of these initially uncomfortable or faked acts gradually builds historical evidence which refutes the previous doubt. The concept of become it. This transcends simply achieving an external goal, make it. The goal is not just getting the job or closing the deal, make it, but rather embodying the mindset, emotional balance, and presence of someone who is intrinsically capable of achieving these things. It's about identity transformation. Instead of asking, what do I have to do to appear confident? The individual begins to ask, who am I when I am at my best and most present? This internalization process is deeply linked to neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, forming new neural connections throughout life. When a behavior is repeated, the neural pathway associated with it is strengthened. By repeatedly practicing the high-power pose and the behavior that follows it, the brain creates a new pathway for stress response. Instead of the standard route of withdrawal and doubt associated with high cortisol, the brain learns to access the route of expansion and assertiveness associated with testosterone. What was initially a conscious and forced act of pretending becomes automatic, unconscious, and authentic response. The new attitude has been incorporated into the individual's identity. Inner doubt is overcome because the individual has, in fact, become the person he pretended to be. The body-mind connection. The body-mind connection, or body-mind loop. This is the fundamental principle that unifies Amy Cuddy's research on body posture and presence. This detailed concept challenges the Cartesian dualism that historically separated mind and body, proposing instead a continuous and interdependent feedback system where physiological and psychological states mutually influence and modulate each other. It is the profound understanding that change in one sphere inevitably leads to change in the other. Historically, Western psychology and philosophy have tended to prioritize the mind, assuming that thoughts, emotions, and intentions are the primary drivers that dictate bodily expression. Sadness leads to slumped shoulders, joy leads to smiles, and anxiety leads to shrinking. However, research on the mind-body connection, particularly in contexts of power and stress, robustly demonstrates that the reverse is equally, if not more, powerful as an intervention tool. Delving deeper into neuroscience and endocrinology, the body-mind loop explains how physical posture acts as a powerful mechanism of priming for the brain. The brain is constantly monitoring internal and external sensory signals to create a map of safety, status, and available resources. When the body adopts a high-power posture, expansive and open, this physical configuration sends a series of nonverbal signals to the brain, interpreted as, there is no immediate threat, there are sufficient resources, and the individual is in a position of control. This interpretation, in turn, triggers a hormonal and neural cascade. The amygdala, the brain's alarm center, is calmed, reducing the activation of the fight-or-flight response. Simultaneously, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal (HPA) axis, responsible for the release of cortisol, the stress hormone, is inhibited, resulting in decreased levels of anxiety and reactivity. This reduction in cortisol is critical, as doubt and imposter syndrome are often cognitive manifestations of a state of high physiological stress. By lowering cortisol through posture, the mind has space to function more clearly and rationally. In parallel, a power pose stimulates neural centers associated with the reward and approach systems, leading to increased testosterone. Testosterone, as the hormone of dominance and self-confidence, facilitates engagement with the world, risk-taking, and persistence. By raising testosterone, the body posture is, in essence, configuring the mind for a state of greater assertiveness and less inhibition. The crucial detail of body-mind loop that he creates a positive reinforcement cycle. When an anxious individual adopts a power pose for 2 minutes, they experience a reduction in cortisol and an increase in testosterone. This genuine chemical shift generates a subjective feeling of greater calm and competence, allowing the person to execute the next challenging step, such as public speaking, more effectively. Success in execution reinforces the belief in the effectiveness of the pose, encouraging its future repetition. Over time and with repetition, the nervous system learns this new pattern of stress response. This connection is the opposite of the vicious cycle of doubt. In a state of doubt, fear leads to a posture of contraction and closure, crossed arms, hunched shoulders. This posture sends signals to the brain that the individual is in danger or weak, which, in turn, increases cortisol and anxiety. Increased anxiety reinforces the closure posture, perpetuating the cycle of insecurity and doubt. Cuddy's intervention is a cycle-breaking mechanism, using the body as the primary leverage point to reverse the mental state of insecurity. The depth of the body-mind connection, therefore, lies in its nature. Pragmatic and immediate, it doesn't take years of therapy to challenge deeply ingrained beliefs. It's possible to achieve a physiological hack in just 120 seconds. By understanding that posture is not merely the packaging of our mind, but a powerful neurophysiological regulatory tool, the individual gains control to induce self-confidence and presence whenever necessary, training the brain through the body to never again surrender to debilitating doubt. Cultivating presence. Cultivating presence is the ultimate goal and ideal psychological state that Amy Cuddy's methodology seeks to achieve, serving as the most effective antidote to chronic self-doubt and imposter syndrome. Presence, in this context, does not refer to mere physical presence in a place, but rather to a deeply integrated mental and emotional state. It is defined as the feeling of being personally aligned, a moment when our inner thoughts, feelings, values, and potential are in full sync with our external expression, allowing us to communicate who we truly are with conviction and clarity. It is the momentary and unwavering belief that we are sufficient for the situation in question. The conceptual history of this topic delves into the distinction between presence and traditional trust. Trust is often seen as dependent on external outcomes. On-performance presence, on the other hand, is an internal state that does not depend on external validation or a history of immediate success. It is the internal acceptance of one's own inherent worth, freeing up mental energy that would otherwise be spent worrying about what others are thinking or what could go wrong. The process of cultivating presence is intrinsically linked to managing anxiety and social pressure. Doubt arises when we feel threatened or evaluated. The focus shifts to performance and the image we are projecting, instead of remaining on the task or the message we want to convey. This shift in focus creates a attendance deficit. In this scenario, the individual is physically present, but their mind is trapped in a cycle of negative self-evaluation and worry. This critical self-observation drains cognitive resources and sabotages performance, validating initial fears of inadequacy. Cultivating presence works by redirecting focus. Instead of focusing on the feared outcome, if I fail, I will be humiliated, presence redirects attention to the core values and purpose by remembering the values that motivate them, be it integrity, justice, innovation, or connection. Individuals anchor themselves in something greater than the momentary fear of failure. This act of self-affirmation based on values has been shown in psychological research to have the ability to dampen the stress response and increase cognitive resilience, as the sense of identity and self-worth is no longer entirely linked to the success or failure of that single interaction. One detailed aspect of cultivating presence is the distinction Amy Cuddy makes between feeling in control and act with conviction. Presence doesn't require a person to completely eliminate anxiety, which is often unrealistic in high-pressure situations. Instead, it teaches a person to function effectively in the presence of anxiety. The deliberate use of high-power pose, for example, is a physical method for entering this state. The pose, as already established, alters brain chemistry to reduce cortisol and increase testosterone. This physiological change provides biological resource, the necessary calmness and assertiveness, so that the individual can express their true self, overcoming the inhibition of doubt. The repetition of this cycle, using posture to change the chemistry, express authenticity, and achieve a better result, reinforces the sense of presence. Over time, the individual learns to associate presence with their state of maximum potential, and this state becomes more accessible and less dependent on the initial external posture. It is the internalization of the belief that I belong here and I have what it takes to contribute. Doubt dissolves because, in the state of presence, the energy that would be spent questioning oneself is channeled into meaningful action and authentic communication. Thus, cultivating presence is the path to transforming uncertainty into conviction, freeing the potential for genuine expression. Managing cortisol. Cortisol management is a fundamental pillar of Amy Cuddy's strategy for eradicating doubt and promoting presence, as it directly addresses physiological basis of stress and insecurity. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid hormone produced by the adrenal glands in response to stress and is the central component of the body's defense system, coordinated by the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal (HPA) axis. The detailed history of this topic lies in understanding how this ancestral survival mechanism has become a saboteur of self-confidence in the modern social environment. Cortisol is vital. It mobilizes the body's energy during a threat, raising blood sugar, increasing alertness, and suppressing non-essential functions such as the immune and digestive systems, preparing the body for fight or flight. This mechanism is extremely effective in confronting predators or imminent physical dangers. However, in the contemporary context, most of the threats we face are not wild tigers, but rather social and psychological threats, an important presentation, a job interview, a difficult confrontation, or the constant self-evaluation and fear of judgment. Instead of quickly dissipating after the event, social stress can keep cortisol levels elevated for extended periods, creating a state of chronic hypervigilance and exhaustion. Chronically high cortisol levels are directly correlated with psychological states of intense self-doubt, anxiety, fear of failure, and the perpetuation of imposter syndrome. Physiologically, high cortisol inhibits the functions of the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for complex reasoning, planning, and decision-making. When cortisol is high, the mind gets stuck in a binary and reactive thinking mode, hindering authentic expression, creativity, and the ability to think clearly under pressure, precisely the qualities that presence aims to release. Amy Cuddy's research contribution lies in offering a physiological and behavioral hack to interrupt this cycle of stress without relying on slow cognitive changes. The concept of the power of body posture, to which cortisol management is intrinsically linked, is not based on optimistic thoughts or self-affirmations, which the anxious mind can easily reject, but rather on a physical intervention which acts directly on the endocrine system. The protocol for adopting high power pose, open, expansive, and space-occupying positions, for just 2 minutes, has been rigorously tested and demonstrated the ability to induce a significant and measurable decrease in circulating blood cortisol levels. By forcing the body to assume a form that the central nervous system universally associates with safety, high status, and lack of threat, the individual is, in essence, sending a biological message of tranquility to the HPA axis. This message contradicts the subjective perception of stress. The magnitude of this intervention is crucial. An average 25% drop in cortisol levels in 120 seconds represents a rapid and powerful hormonal de-escalation. This de-escalation is what allows the window of opportunity and for presence. By reducing the chemical noise and of stress, the individual gains temporary access to their cognitive resources and their capacity for self-regulation. This reduction in cortisol allows the individual to move from the behavioral inhibition system, fear, withdrawal, to the approach system, action, reward-seeking, facilitated by the simultaneous increase in testosterone. Cortisol management, therefore, is not about eliminating stress, but about modulation of your physiological responses, so that it doesn't become debilitating. By reducing cortisol before a challenging event, the person is equipping themselves with a biochemical base of calm, making them less susceptible to panic or succumbing to self-doubt during the assessment. Posture acts as a endocrine unbrake for the stress response, allowing the mind to remain flexible and focused instead of rigid and defensive. This is the essence of mind training, using the body to control the chemistry that would otherwise allow doubt to take over thinking. Abandoning the armor of perfection. The concept of abandoning the armor of perfection is an essential component in Amy Cuddy's methodology, as it deals with psychological and social origin of doubt and imposter syndrome. The relentless pursuit of perfection acts as armor that, ironically, does not protect the individual, but isolates, exhausts, and crucially, amplifies the inner voice of doubt. The detailed history of this topic lies in the transition from the emphasis on flawless performance, which generates anxiety, for the authenticity and vulnerability, which generates connection and presence. The armor of perfection is built upon the mistaken belief that personal worth is intrinsically linked to the absence of flaws. In high-pressure and highly evaluated environments, people feel the need to project an image of total competence and control, believing that any sign of weakness, error, or uncertainty will lead to rejection or failure. This need is a protective response, but extremely costly, as it creates a state of constant cognitive vigilance. The mental energy that should be directed towards the task itself, towards presence and authentic performance, is diverted to monitoring self-image, ensuring that no cracks appear in the facade of invulnerability. This hypervigilance, however, is a catalyst for doubt. The more an individual tries to be perfect, the more sensitive they become to small flaws and slips, which are inherent to the human condition. These slips are then inflated by the brain as evidence of imminent fraud, reinforcing the imposter syndrome cycle. The person lives in constant fear of being discovered as insufficient, and this fear of exposure is the engine of paralyzing doubt. The armor of perfection, therefore, is not a shield against doubt, but rather a magnet for anxiety. The abandonment of this armor is linked to the concept of vulnerability as a strength, not a weakness. Vulnerability, in Cuddy's context, is the courage to show up and be seen for who you truly are, with your imperfections, uncertainties, and humanity. Vulnerability disarms the cycle of doubt because it turns off the game of critical self-observation. When an individual decides that it's okay not to be perfect, the energy that was spent maintaining facades is released and channeled into the task at hand and into genuine connection. This transition to authenticity is facilitated by understanding that social function of imperfection, by displaying controlled vulnerability or strategically admitting uncertainty within the limits of their competence. The individual does not diminish their value, but rather builds a bridge of trust and humanity with others. Perfection is cold and unattainable. It creates distance. Authenticity, which includes accepting imperfection, creates closeness and empathy. By seeing humanity in others, people feel safer showing their own, and the social environment becomes less threatening and judgmental for the individual. To train the mind to abandon perfection, the methodology involves redefining success. Success is not measured by the absence of errors, but by ability to appear authentic and to recover quickly of the mistakes. The focus shifts from result, which must be perfect, for the process, which must be done in person. By releasing the need to be perfect, the individual frees themselves from self-sabotage. Doubt loses its power because the fundamental premise, that imperfection is catastrophic, is dismantled. Abandoning this armor is, in essence, the act of courage. It's about accepting one's own humanity and allowing one's own vulnerability to become the source of a deeper, more stable, and authentic power than any facade of perfection could ever provide. It's surrendering to the fact that being enough is the only perfection necessary. Rewriting the internal narrative. The topic, rewriting the internal narrative, constitutes the intervention, cognitive and linguistic, crucial to Amy Cuddy's methodology for combating self-doubt, complementing physiological, body posture and cortisol, and behavioral, fake-it-till-you-make-it strategy. Delving deeper into this concept requires a detailed analysis of how internal dialogue and how we define ourselves under pressure shape our state of presence and ability to act. The history of this topic lies in the psychology of self-affirmation based on values and in understanding the fallibility of superficial positive self-talk. Doubt, in its most destructive form, manifests itself as a relentless and critical internal narrative. I'm not good enough. I'm going to fail. They're going to find out about me. This voice is not just a passing thought. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. This drains cognitive energy, increases stress, raising cortisol, the opposite of what power pose aims for, and shifts the focus from performance to self-criticism. Instead of concentrating on the task, the individual is engaged in a destructive internal debate about their worth and competence. In this circumstance, the mind acts as the main saboteur of presence. The traditional self-help approach often suggests combating this self-doubt with positive and generic self-affirmations, such as, "I am amazing," or "I will succeed." However, research in social psychology demonstrates that when an individual is already in a state of low self-confidence or high stress, these grandiose affirmations can be actively detrimental. The brain, confronted with a statement that blatantly contradicts internal emotional and physiological experience, high cortisol and feelings of insecurity, rejects the affirmation. This rejection not only invalidates the effort, but can even lead to failure. Increase the feeling of falseness and fraud, intensifying the initial doubt. The internalized critical self responds to the positive affirmation with cynical sarcasm. "No, you're not. Stop lying to yourself." Cuddy's strategy of rewriting the internal narrative avoids this trap by focusing not on asserting competence, which is what doubt questions, but on reaffirm core values and purpose. This technique is known as self-affirmation of values. The crucial detail is that, instead of making statements about the future performance, regardless of success or failure, the individual must connect with what they deeply value and what defines their identity outside of the immediate stressful situation. Before facing a high-pressure situation, the exercise involves reflecting on and reaffirming in writing, or mentally, the values that are most important to you. For example, being honest, being compassionate, upholding justice, being creative, or having integrity. Activating these core values has a proven psychophysiological effect. It strengthens the sense of coherence and integrity of the individual. The story behind this effect is that, by reaffirming their values, a person shifts their self-definition from the threatening domain, the test or performance evaluation, where they might fail, to a domain where they feel unquestionably competent and worthy, their moral and personal values. This creates a psychological buffer against the threat. By feeling secure in their deepest identity, the individual no longer needs to expend mental energy defending their superficial competence. Stress is reduced because the risk of the situation no longer represents a total threat to their well-being. Intrinsic value. The impact of this technique on rewriting the internal narrative is transformative. Instead of the narrative being dominated by the voice of fear, "I am inadequate," it becomes grounded in the voice of purpose. "I am here to be whole, to contribute creatively, to be a good leader." Doubt about performance capacity is replaced by conviction in purpose. Another crucial technique associated with this topic is pronominal change, which combats excessive focus on the self. Research suggests that talking to yourself using this method, third person using the name itself, for example, "John can do this," instead of "I can do this," creates a healthy psychological distance. This distance allows the individual to observe and advise themselves more objectively, reducing the emotional burden and allowing rational thought to prevail over the emotional reaction of fear. This change in internal language is a subtle but powerful rewriting that transforms the internal dialogue from emotional criticism to objective coaching. In short, Rewriting the internal narrative is not an exercise in delusional positive thinking, but a sophisticated strategy for reorient to self-identity, moving away from the threat of failure and towards core values and purposes, thus silencing doubt by depriving it of its destructive power over the mind. We've reached the end of our journey through the 7 pillars to train your mind against doubt. But this isn't the end of your transformation, it's just the beginning. If you're ready to stop just pretending and start to become, to be the most confident and present person you can be, we have a simple request for you. Subscribe. If this content has unlocked a new perspective on your self-confidence and the mind-body connection, click the subscribe button. Join our community and make sure you don't miss the next ones. Hacks mental and strategic presence. Activate notifications to receive reminders for each new tool that will shield your mind from insecurity. Comment and share. We want to hear from you. Which of Amy Cuddy's 10 topics resonated the most? With his struggle against doubt, was it the power of posture, cortisol management, or the abandonment of permission? Leave a comment below and share a situation where you'll use the power pose this week. Your comment will inspire others. Remember, a doubt, it's a habit. Trust it's a skill that can be trained. Start your training right now.